Hi everyone, my name is Hongxia Shan and I'm speaking from the University of British Columbia, and I'm sorry that I have to show up through a recorded presentation given the time differences. So my talk is entitled Turning Differences into Professional Advantages, or rather Immigrant Advantage, Lifelong Learning of Immigrant Engineers from a practice-based perspective. I do acknowledge that there's a misnomer here. I'm not speaking so much about lifelong learning per se, as I will about professional learning and knowledge transfer in the context of migration. Now, I want to start by acknowledging the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the coastal Salish peoples on which I live and work and play. And going right into the topic, so enter and unemployment of immigrants is a perpetual challenge facing Canada among other countries. And here, especially immigrants with advanced training and educational backgrounds, and sometimes called skilled immigrants, although the pathway for skilled immigrants have diversified in recent years. Now, studies about immigrant center and unemployment often take the perspectives of human capital skills, cultural capital, and social capital networks, and people have been developing models based on those skill and capital constructs to predict and explain immigrants' labor market outcomes. Now, the challenge, actually I shouldn't say the challenge, the major narrative is that immigrant success in the wholesale labor market depends on the nature, the form, and the level of capitals and skills that they supposedly possess, and the extent to which those capitals and skills that are recognized in Canada, in the wholesale societies. Now, critiques have been directed to this narrative itself, and people have tried to challenge the Eurocentrism and the colonial power relations that underlie the divide of the recognizer and the recognized. And despite the critical movement of the literature, the battleground is still anchored to the notion of skill valorization and cultural recognition. Now, if you look to the literature more closely, there's another narrative that's gaining more attention today. And Alan Williams, for instance, speaks about immigrants as distinctive knowledge workers or knowledge practitioners. And he believes that immigrants of all backgrounds should be recognized as distinctive knowledge bearers. Immigrant knowledge is valuable precisely because it is different. Now, the argument is much larger. I'm just going to flash it quickly here. And another notion that's similar to Williams' proposal is migration-specific capital, meaning immigrants will find a mechanism to valorize the capitals that they bring in to the wholesale society. And related to that notion is the notion of migration-related competency. And if you look at transnational studies, apparently there's ample evidence that shows that immigrants do leverage the differences that they bring to their economic and social and cultural advantages. Now, so I come up with the notion of the immigrant advantage, and to indicate a positional potentiality that immigrants occupy in the wholesale labor market, given the kind of differences that they bring and they embody. And the idea is not to argue that immigrants are better workers or people knowledge workers in particular than their Canadian or native their counterpart in the host society. It is rather to say that it takes certain kinds of practices for those advantages to be mobilized. And with that, I'm going to share my major question here. To me, again, the question is not what kind of differences people bring, but rather what it takes for differences to become an immigrant advantage. And given my work with immigrant professionals, I approach this question from the idea of professional learning and knowledge transfer. Now, professional learning and knowledge transfer are key concepts and area of studies in any type of professional development and professional learning courses. Now, those two terms, I would say, are typically considered as two sides of the same coin. The former, professional learning, is commonly understood as the enhancement of knowledge, skills, and competency within professions, and knowledge transfer is understood as a learning process involved for people to apply their prior learning in a new context. But most of the studies on professional learning and knowledge transfer focuses on the individual as the unit of analysis. And in my work, I wish to direct attention to the organizational conditions that give rise to professional learning and knowledge transfer. And in my efforts to expand on this idea, practice-based learning and knowing, I draw on a mix of practice theories that are social, cultural, and social material at the same time. Specifically, I draw on CHAT, cultural historical activity theories, community practice, and sometimes people will say practice is a community, so there is a tension there. And I also draw on social material thinking, including actor network theories and assemblage thinking. But taken together, I do recognize that those theories do not share a common ontology, but I do think that they help shed light on learning and knowing in different ways. CHAT and COP, for instance, help to highlight the normative dimension of human practices, and social material thinking help you zoom into the moment-to-moment accomplishment of practices. So taken together, continuous learning and knowing are believed to be constituted through collective activities where people engage in a common practice, and through community practice, and through the coming together of the human and non-human others. Now, the research that the paper draws on is funded by SHIRK, and the overall objective or goal of the study is to look at the professional contributions that the immigrant make to the engineering and health professions. So for this paper, I draw on the research with engineers only. Now, in terms of methodology, I use career history and career stories. I also use thematic analysis and situated analysis. So thematic analysis is to understand the pattern of career development and patterns of change. And situated analysis is really there to capture both the structural, if you will, and emerging conditions involved in the constitution of the significant events that people reported. Now, research participants, I had 32 of them, and 15 of them, I should say, are identified through our search on professional journals for key figures, for immigrants figured or featured rather as significant contributors to the profession. And the other the rest of the participants were reached through our call for self-nomination, basically for people who believe that they have made a significant contribution to the profession. Now, 10 of them women and 22 men. All of them came from, let's say, developing world, and 17 of them also attended postgraduate programs in Canada. So I have to say close to half of them came as international students, and then they decided to stay on and started working in Canada. Now, coming to research findings, 4 major themes. One is around professional learning, one knowledge transfer, and then I would argue or make clear that for people to translate their knowing and learning within practice, they do need others, both professional others and or other practitioners and professional objects. And then finally, I'll talk about what I call epistemic cultures in the constitutional people's learning and knowing experiences. Now, learning is a key finding across the board, so everyone learns and everyone talks about their learning experiences. Now, this experiences, or rather process, is most pronounced for people who are new to, who have had little work experiences prior to coming to Canada. So the learning process that they reported is very much akin to what Leva and Bunger called legitimate peripheral participation, which is marked by a need to earn your membership and to fit into the practices within the community. Now, what I want to add is that even for people who are new, who have had lots of experiences, they also talked about a process of adjustment, and in terms of language, in terms of cultural practices. So one of the respondents who worked in, I think, 3 different countries, including countries in the Gulf region, talked about how, shared that it took him about between 5 and 10 years to learn how to poke jokes by not offend others. So another finding is that people, if there's anything that take out of people or move people out of the transitional or adjustment period of time, it is their continuous involvement in projects and problem solving at work, as well as their continued learning in relation to organizational and professional changes. So problem arising at work, for instance, often send respondents to source information, look for designs, and learn from research papers, and inquire with their peer professionals. So they typically become the object or objectives or motives for them to engage on learning projects. Now, knowledge transfer, they're all very proud of their educational background, and when apparently the fact that they are able to work in Canada says the extent of knowledge transfer that's already happening, but the type of knowledge transfer that they recounted are those that are considered to be different. So they talk about different knowledge, methodology, technology, and practices and policies that they bring over. And what is more important to note is this comparative lens that some of them introduced. And given their experiences in the past, it doesn't have to be closely related to their status as immigrants. And this is what respondents told me. It has to do with the work experiences or the professional journeys that they have traversed, and they were able to identify gaps of practices and issues and areas for improvements in their Canadian workplaces. And what is more interesting to me is that almost everyone talked about personal characteristics that they benefited from, such as tenacity, curiosity, perseverance, passion, and things can vary, and as well as an understanding and sensitivity developed based on their biographical backgrounds as immigrants. Now, what I need to emphasize is that if you zoom into, like at the surface level, it looks like respondents are highly independent, entrepreneurial, very resourceful. But if you look closer to their experiences, at all times, they needed others, both human others and non-human things, to make their learning and knowing matter. So those non-human things include professional objects such as code, books, blueprints, calculation books, research papers, technologies, and so on. And to give you a very simple example, it is often the software or programs that computer-based programs that help them solidify some of the knowledge that they were able to translate into their practice and amplify the impact of those type of knowledge introduced. Now, the individuals who they named as instrumental in them being able to achieve anything are all ordinary people. Sometimes a peer student, a research team member, academic supervisor, a colleague, a peer professional. What is interesting is that often they don't find it a challenge to find resources, to access information. But when it comes to their peer colleagues, it can be a challenge. And often people talk about having to prove themselves, having to respect, having to earn the respect from their peers in order to function, or in order to to perform to the best of their capacities. And here is just one of the examples. Now, what is interesting? Well, you can say professional learning is an individual engagement. It is always organized. And in this regard, I would use Joan's Tina's notion of epistemic culture to describe the complex of entities that work together to govern professional practices in engineering. So this culture is woven through the interactions of individuals, communities, business organizations, and training and educational institutions. And they all have different histories and operate with diverse mandates and interests. But they do share a common interest in advancing engineering knowledge and practices and holding engineers and engineering accountable to the public. Although those are not the sole purposes, and protectionism, for instance, is one significant feature of regulatory bodies when it comes to licensing, for instance. So being aware of the time, just moving on quickly to the discussion. Just 2 points perhaps. One is that immigrant engineers or respondents were very resourceful, and they're keen learners and keen knowledge practitioners and knowledge workers. Now, here I'm reminded of Sarah Mead's remark, where she said, basically, if you have the resources, you don't have to be resourceful. So we do have to ask a question why, some people have to work more diligently than others. Work is a labor, learning is a labor itself. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that there are a few reports of discrimination experienced by the respondents. And this is not to say that discrimination doesn't happen. It is, my observation is that to cope with microaggressions at work, the respondents tend to brush off the unhappy encounters at work, but that doesn't mean things do not happen. So that's one point. The other thing is, so while we often think about knowledge as concentric, Canadian centered or centered around the institutions within the host of societies, the nexus, if you look closely at the nexus of the epistemic communities and organizations and institutions that govern the availability, validation, and circulation of professional knowledge, things are more decentered. So some of the entities are more established and exercise more control over professional memberships and professional standards, and others are more emergent and informal, but still they play a role. So again, expertise is more distributed than centralized in any one particular place. So I know I'm a little bit over the time. I'm going to stop here. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.